Mary Celeste, the Ghost Ship Mystery. Hello and welcome. Today, I'm going to whisper to you about one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time, the story of the Mary Celeste. It's a name that may ring a bell, but the true tale of this ghost ship has puzzled and fascinated people for over a century. Imagine this: a sturdy, seaworthy brigantine, perfectly intact, sails aimlessly across the open ocean. No signs of struggle, no damage from a storm, yet its crew has vanished without a trace. This eerie discovery was made in 1872, and since then, countless theories have emerged, from piracy and mutiny to the supernatural. But to this day, no one knows for certain what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste. In this video, we'll unravel the strange events leading up to the ship's abandonment, examine the investigation that followed, and explore the many theories that have tried and failed to solve this ghostly enigma. So, get comfortable, relax, and let's dive into the mystery of the Mary Celeste, a story as deep and dark as the ocean itself. Setting sail, the Mary Celeste's final voyage. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste departed from New York Harbor, embarking on what was expected to be a routine journey to Genoa, Italy. Under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs, an experienced and devout seaman, the ship was loaded with 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol intended for European markets. Captain Briggs had meticulously prepared for the journey, ensuring the vessel was seaworthy and well-provisioned for what was to be a transatlantic voyage. The Mary Celeste, originally built in Nova Scotia in 1861 and christened as the Amazon, had undergone several changes in ownership before receiving its final name in 1869. Despite her somewhat troubled history, including a collision and a fire in earlier years, she was now considered a reliable and sturdy ship. Captain Briggs was a highly capable mariner, having spent years at sea and commanding several vessels prior to taking the helm of the Mary Celeste. He was known for his calm demeanor and his dedication to his family and faith. His wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, accompanied him on this voyage, along with a small, hand-picked crew of 7. The crew of the Mary Celeste was comprised of experienced sailors. They hailed from various backgrounds, but each man had been personally selected by Captain Briggs for his reliability and skill. The first mate, Albert Richardson, was a seasoned sailor entrusted by Briggs. The second mate, Andrew Gilling, was originally from Denmark and had a reputation for competence. The other crew members, including a cook and seaman from Germany and the United States, were all regarded as capable, dependable men. With the crew in place, the ship fully stocked with provisions, and favorable weather conditions ahead, everything appeared set for a smooth and successful journey across the Atlantic. As the Mary Celeste left New York's harbor and made its way into the open sea, life on board was expected to follow the usual rhythm of long voyages. The crew would have settled into their duties, maintaining the ship, adjusting sails, and following their watch rotations. The weather remained mild, and the winds were favorable for the first few weeks of the voyage, allowing the Mary Celeste to make steady progress toward Europe. There were no reports of any significant issues in the early days, and the ship's log, maintained by Captain Briggs, documented a peaceful and uneventful journey. By November 25th, the Mary Celeste had reached a position just north of the Azores, an isolated group of islands in the mid-Atlantic, roughly 500 miles from the Portuguese coast. According to the ship's log, everything seemed to be proceeding as planned. The final entry in the logbook was brief and noted the ship's position and course. There was no indication of any storm or distress. At this point, it seemed like the voyage was going smoothly. However, just 10 days later, on December 5, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Grazia, commanded by Captain David Morehouse, spotted the Mary Celeste drifting in the open sea, seemingly abandoned. The Dei Grazia had departed from New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste and was following a similar transatlantic route to Europe. As they approached the ship, the crew of the Dei Grazia noted that the Mary Celeste appeared to be moving erratically. Upon closer inspection, they observed that the ship's sails were partially set but torn and damaged, flapping in the wind without control. Captain Morehouse and his crew were immediately suspicious. The Mary Celeste showed no signs of serious damage, no indication of having been caught in a violent storm, and no outward appearance of having been attacked by pirates. Yet, when a boarding party was sent over to investigate, they found the ship eerily deserted. The lifeboat was missing, but all the cargo, personal belongings, and the ship's logs were still on board. The ship's provisions were more than sufficient, with enough food and water to last the crew several months. There was no sign of violence or a struggle, and no damage that could explain why the crew had left in such a hurry, if they had left of their own free will. The mystery of the Mary Celeste had begun. What had happened to the crew between the last log entry on November 25th and the ship's discovery on December 5th? Why had they abandoned the ship, leaving behind their possessions and a fully operational vessel? These questions would haunt investigators for decades to come, as theories ranging from foul play to natural disasters and even supernatural occurrences would swirl around the fate of the ship and its vanished crew. The Mary Celeste, once an ordinary brigantine on a simple commercial voyage, was about to become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in maritime history. The crew, who was on board? The mystery of the Mary Celeste is deeply intertwined with the lives of those who were aboard her during her final voyage. Understanding who these people were, their backgrounds, and the relationships they had with one another offers crucial context to the enduring mystery of their disappearance. The ship's small crew, handpicked by Captain Benjamin Briggs, was a mix of experienced seamen from different nationalities, with the captain's own family joining him on what was supposed to be a routine transatlantic voyage. Captain Benjamin Briggs was the commanding figure of the Mary Celeste. Born in Wareham, Massachusetts in 1835, Briggs came from a seafaring family, and by his mid-30s, he had built a reputation as a capable and trustworthy captain. He had commanded several vessels before taking charge of the Mary Celeste, and his peers regarded him as competent, conservative in his approach, and deeply religious. A devoted family man, Briggs often sailed with his wife Sarah, and on this voyage, he brought along their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Leaving behind their son, Arthur, who was attending school, the Briggs family expected this voyage to be another successful crossing before settling in Italy. Briggs's decision to bring his family along on this voyage was not unusual, as many captains of the time did the same, combining work and family life aboard ship. Sarah Briggs, like many seafaring wives, was familiar with life at sea. She had made several voyages with her husband before and was prepared to endure the hardships of a transatlantic journey. Her presence, along with their young daughter, brought a sense of normalcy to the ship, a family aboard, embarking on what seemed like a routine trip to Europe. The crew of the Mary Celeste consisted of 7 men, each chosen for their skills and reliability. First among them was Albert Richardson, the first mate, who was Briggs's right-hand man. Richardson, a seasoned sailor from Maine, was known for his calm demeanor and competence at sea. Like Briggs, He was a devout Christian and considered trustworthy by his peers. He had sailed with Briggs before, and their professional relationship was built on mutual respect and confidence. Second in command was Andrew Gilling, the second mate, originally from Denmark. Gilling was a relatively new addition to the crew, but he came with good references and experience in long voyages. At 25, he was younger than Richardson but considered capable enough to take charge in Richardson's absence. The inclusion of experienced seamen like Gilling and Richardson reflected Briggs's careful planning and desire to ensure a smooth and safe journey. The other members of the crew included Volkert Lorenz, a Dutchman who served as the ship's steward and cook, and two German seamen, Arian Martens and Gottlieb Gutschad, both of whom had been hired for their reputation as steady, hard-working sailors. These men, though not American, had been vouched for by shipping agents and were seen as reliable hands who could be trusted to navigate the difficult Atlantic crossing. Also on board was a second steward, Boatswain Edward Head, an Englishman who was responsible for the maintenance and rigging of the ship. Each crew member had a clear role on the ship, and their experience suggested that they were capable of handling the demands of the transatlantic voyage. Their diverse backgrounds and nationalities were not unusual for merchant ships of the time, which often brought together sailors from different parts of the world. Importantly, there was no indication of tension or discord among the crew before the voyage began. The men were selected for their reliability, and Captain Briggs had made every effort to ensure a harmonious and capable team. For the first few weeks of the voyage, everything seemed to go according to plan. Captain Briggs's log entries indicated no signs of trouble. The crew carried out their duties, adjusting sails, maintaining the ship, and ensuring that the cargo of denatured alcohol was secure. Briggs's wife Sarah would have been occupied caring for their young daughter, likely providing a calming presence on board. The voyage seemed routine, the crew working as a well-oiled machine under the captain's guidance. However, what unfolded after the ship reached the Azores on November 25, 1872, remains a mystery. The crew's sudden disappearance, leaving behind a fully functional ship and their personal belongings, has baffled investigators for more than a century. When the ship was found by the Dei Grazia, the crew's quarters were in order, their possessions untouched, and there were no signs of a struggle. The food supply was ample, the ship was in seaworthy condition, and yet the crew was gone. What could have compelled these experienced sailors to abandon ship? Some theories suggest that the crew may have feared an imminent disaster, such as a possible explosion from the volatile alcohol cargo. Others have speculated that illness, poisoning, or even mutiny might have played a role. Still, no definitive answers have ever been found. The fact that this was a close-knit group, led by a captain who had a strong bond with his crew and his family on board, only deepens the mystery. The crew of the Mary Celeste, including Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their daughter Sophia, remain at the heart of the mystery. Each of them had hopes and plans for the future. Briggs intended to settle in Italy with his family once the voyage was completed. Yet they, along with the rest of the crew, vanished into thin air, leaving behind a ghost ship and a trail of unanswered questions. The Discovery, found adrift. On the crisp, cold morning of December 5, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Grazia, under the command of Captain David Morehouse, was making its way across the Atlantic, bound for Gibraltar. The crew, following a similar route to that of the Mary Celeste, was familiar with the challenges of transatlantic voyages, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to encounter. As the Dei Grazia sailed through calm waters about 400 miles east of the Azores, one of the ship's crew members, John Johnson, noticed something unusual on the horizon, a ship in the distance, drifting aimlessly, its sails partially torn and flapping idly in the breeze. The vessel appeared abandoned, or at the very least, severely undercrewed. Captain Morehouse and his crew became intrigued and somewhat alarmed. This wasn't a normal sight. Ships didn't just wander without purpose in such a vulnerable state unless something had gone terribly wrong. As the Dei Grazia drew closer, the crew identified the ship as the Mary Celeste. Morehouse was particularly shocked, as he knew Captain Benjamin Briggs personally. The two had met in New York shortly before their respective voyages began, and both ships had left around the same time. Morehouse had no reason to believe anything was amiss with Briggs's journey, so the sight of the Mary Celeste, drifting in such a state, filled him with concern. Captain Morehouse immediately ordered his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, and a small boarding party to row over to the Mary Celeste to investigate. As they approached, the men saw that the ship was still upright and appeared seaworthy from the outside, although it was moving erratically, caught in the light wind with its sails hanging loosely. There were no obvious signs of damage, no evidence of a storm, no gaping holes in the hull, and no outward signs of violence. Yet, something was clearly wrong. Once DeVoe and his team boarded the Mary Celeste, the eerie stillness of the abandoned ship sank in. The crew members cautiously explored the deck, calling out for any sign of life, but their voices echoed unanswered through the empty corridors. The ship was devoid of its crew. As they moved further below deck, DeVoe's team began inspecting the cabins. They found the crew's personal belongings still in place: clothing, pipes, tools, and other personal effects, undisturbed. The ship's logbook was intact, the last entry dated November 25th, placing the ship near the Azores. But there was no indication of what had happened in the days that followed. One of the strangest discoveries was the ship's lifeboat, which was missing. There was no sign of it anywhere aboard the Mary Celeste. The assumption was that the crew, for some reason, had abandoned the ship in haste, taking the lifeboat with them. But why? The weather had been mild, and there was no sign of a catastrophe that would have forced such a decision. The Mary Celeste was in good condition, with no significant water in her hold, though some of her sails were torn and there was slight damage to the rigging. These issues alone did not seem severe enough to warrant abandoning ship, especially for an experienced captain like Briggs. Adding to the mystery, the cargo of denatured alcohol remained untouched, though some barrels were found to be empty. There was no evidence of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass or overturned furniture that might suggest a violent altercation or mutiny. The food and water supplies were plentiful, more than enough to last the crew for several months. Even more perplexing was the fact that the ship's navigation instruments, charts, and documents were all still in place, items a crew would typically take if they intended to abandon ship and navigate their way to safety. DeVoe and his men searched every inch of the ship, but they could find no trace of the 10 souls who had been aboard the Mary Celeste. The only clues were a frayed rope trailing in the water from the stern of the ship, suggesting that something, possibly the missing lifeboat, had once been attached. But there was no sign of the lifeboat itself or any of the crew. The mystery deepened with each unanswered question. What could have compelled a seasoned captain like Briggs to leave his ship, especially when there was no immediate threat? And where had they gone? The eerie condition of the Mary Celeste chilled DeVoe and his men as they returned to the Dei Grazia to report their findings to Captain Morehouse. Morehouse decided that they would tow the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where the authorities could investigate and perhaps unravel the mystery. It was a difficult decision, as towing the ship over such a long distance would be slow and dangerous, but Morehouse believed it was the right course of action. He knew that salvaging the Mary Celeste could mean a significant reward, but more than that, he felt a responsibility to uncover the truth of what had happened to Briggs and his crew. Over the next few days, the Dei Grazia carefully towed the Mary Celeste toward Gibraltar, where a formal investigation would soon begin. As the ships made their slow journey, word began to spread about the mysterious discovery, and speculation grew. How could an entire crew disappear without a trace, leaving behind a perfectly seaworthy ship? When the two vessels finally reached Gibraltar on December 13th, they were met with curiosity, suspicion, and the growing sense that this was no ordinary maritime incident. The mystery of the Mary Celeste had only just begun. The investigation begins. First, theories. When the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar on December 13, 1872, it was immediately seized by the local authorities for a salvage hearing. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the ship's discovery, combined with the complete disappearance of its crew, created a wave of speculation, and the officials in Gibraltar were determined to uncover what had happened. A formal investigation, led by Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar, was swiftly launched, with the hope that a thorough examination of the ship might provide answers to this growing maritime enigma. The condition of the Mary Celeste only added to the intrigue. The ship was found to be in seaworthy condition, with no significant damage, no signs of a violent struggle, and the cargo mostly intact. However, certain elements caught the attention of the investigators. For instance, they discovered that 9 barrels of the industrial alcohol had been emptied, though there was no indication of where the alcohol had gone or why these specific barrels were empty. Additionally, the ship's single lifeboat was missing, as was the chronometer and sextant, key instruments used for navigation. Flood, who was known for his suspicion of foul play, immediately began to develop a theory that something sinister had occurred on board the Mary Celeste. He speculated that perhaps the crew had turned on Captain Benjamin Briggs, leading to a violent mutiny. Alternatively, he considered the possibility of piracy, even though there were no signs of theft or damage that would suggest an attack. The idea that a peaceful, routine voyage could turn into chaos with no visible evidence of such upheaval deeply troubled the investigators. As the investigation continued, one of the central mysteries remained: why would the crew have abandoned a perfectly seaworthy ship? The ship's provisions were ample, the water supply was fresh, and the cargo, though dangerous in its raw form, appeared to be properly secured. There was no immediate threat to the crew's survival. What could have driven them to such a desperate action as abandoning ship, and where had they gone? Flood's initial focus on foul play led to an intense scrutiny of the Dei Grazia's crew. Captain David Morehouse and his men were questioned repeatedly, as the timing of their discovery of the Mary Celeste seemed suspicious to some. Morehouse and Briggs had known each other, having met in New York shortly before both ships set sail, leading some to wonder if there was a connection between the two events. However, there was no evidence to suggest that the crew of the Dei Grazia had anything to do with the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew. Morehouse's decision to tow the abandoned ship to Gibraltar and report it to authorities seemed to contradict any theory of wrongdoing on his part. Investigators also examined the ship itself for clues. The frayed rope trailing from the stern, for example, suggested that the crew had hastily abandoned ship using the missing lifeboat. But what had prompted such haste? One theory was that the alcohol in the hold might have leaked, producing dangerous fumes that could have led the crew to fear an imminent explosion. If the fumes were strong enough, it's possible that Captain Briggs and his crew decided to temporarily abandon ship, intending to return once the danger had passed. However, the absence of burn marks or any signs of an explosion weakened this theory. Other theories began to circulate as well. Some suggested that a seaquake or a sudden undersea volcanic eruption near the Azores could have caused the ship to lurch violently, frightening the crew into thinking the ship was about to sink. In such a scenario, they might have abandoned ship in a panic, only to become lost at sea. The lack of substantial damage to the ship, though, cast doubt on this possibility. As the investigation progressed, Flood became increasingly convinced that the answer lay in human misdeeds. He even went so far as to suggest that Captain Briggs himself might have been involved in some sort of criminal activity, perhaps conspiring to defraud the ship's owners by faking a disaster and disappearing with the crew. This theory, however, was quickly dismissed by those who knew Briggs personally. He had an impeccable reputation as a devout Christian and a highly competent captain, and there was no evidence to support the idea that he would have been involved in such a scheme. Despite the mounting questions and conflicting theories, the investigation eventually hit a dead end. The authorities in Gibraltar were unable to find any concrete evidence of foul play, nor could they definitively explain why the crew had vanished. After weeks of scrutiny, the salvage hearing ended with the Mary Celeste being released back to its owners, and Captain Morehouse and his crew received a salvage reward, albeit a much smaller amount than expected due to the lingering suspicions surrounding the case. Although the official inquiry failed to solve the mystery, it succeeded in fueling the public's fascination with the story. Newspapers across Europe and the United States seized on the drama of the Mary Celeste, spinning sensational tales of ghost ships, mutiny, and murder. The image of an abandoned ship drifting across the Atlantic, its crew vanished without a trace, captivated readers, and the Mary Celeste quickly became one of the most famous ghost ships in maritime history. The first round of investigations may have ended, but the legend of the Mary Celeste was only just beginning. With no definitive answers, the mystery would continue to grow, inspiring more theories, speculation, and even supernatural explanations in the years to come. What truly happened aboard the Mary Celeste? The investigation had raised more questions than it had answered, leaving the world to wonder how such an ordinary voyage could end in such extraordinary and baffling circumstances. Piracy or mutiny? What went wrong? As the mystery of the Mary Celeste deepened, two of the earliest and most compelling theories to emerge centered on the ideas of piracy or mutiny. These were logical conclusions for many at the time, given the crew's complete disappearance without any apparent signs of a natural disaster or shipwreck. But were these theories truly plausible? Let's explore how piracy and mutiny became central to early speculation and whether they can hold up under scrutiny. The first theory to gain traction was that the Mary Celeste had fallen victim to a pirate attack. The high seas of the 19th century, though not as dangerous as in earlier centuries, were still occasionally plagued by pirates, especially in areas around the Azores, where the ship was last logged. Pirates, it was theorized, could have overtaken the ship, killed or captured the crew, and left the vessel adrift. This seemed like a reasonable possibility at first, as pirates were known to seize cargo and valuables, and the Atlantic, with its remote waters, was still an active area for piracy during that period. However, upon closer inspection, several key details cast doubt on the piracy theory. Firstly, the cargo of denatured alcohol was mostly intact, save for the few missing barrels that had not been tampered with. Pirates, especially those in need of quick profit, would have likely plundered the ship for anything valuable, including the cargo, navigational instruments, or personal belongings of the crew. Yet, the ship's valuables were untouched. Additionally, there were no signs of violence on board, no blood, no broken furniture, no bullet holes or cutlass marks. Everything on the Mary Celeste was eerily in order, suggesting that if pirates had boarded the ship, they had done so without leaving a trace of struggle, which would have been unusual. Another blow to the piracy theory was that the Mary Celeste was found drifting in a stable condition, its sails and rigging mostly intact, albeit slightly damaged. A pirate crew would likely have left the ship in a much worse state, as they would have no reason to maintain its integrity once they had looted it. The mystery of why the crew would have abandoned ship, if pirates had indeed attacked, remained unresolved. Without evidence of robbery or violence, the piracy theory began to unravel. The second prominent theory was mutiny. This theory was especially intriguing to investigators like Frederick Solly Flood, the lead investigator in Gibraltar, who was convinced that some form of foul play involving the crew had occurred. According to this theory, tensions among the crew might have boiled over, leading to a rebellion against Captain Briggs. In such a scenario, the crew could have overpowered the captain and officers, seized control of the ship, and perhaps even murdered them before fleeing in the lifeboat. Mutinies, though relatively rare by the 19th century, still happened occasionally, especially in long voyages where isolation and difficult conditions could strain relationships between the captain and crew. Flood was particularly drawn to this idea, as it seemed to explain why the ship was abandoned while still being in good condition. Could it be that the crew had turned on Briggs, and after a violent confrontation, they fled with the lifeboat, fearing retribution or a disaster they themselves had caused? However, much like the piracy theory, the idea of mutiny had significant flaws. For one, Captain Briggs was known to have a good relationship with his crew, and there was no evidence to suggest any discontent before or during the voyage. The crew was carefully selected by Briggs himself, chosen for their experience and reliability. Moreover, there were no signs of a struggle or violence anywhere on board. If mutiny had taken place, it was highly unlikely that it would have been so clean, with no evidence left behind. Additionally, it seemed odd that a mutinous crew would have left behind all the ship's navigational equipment and provisions. If the crew had intended to escape and start anew, they would have needed these items to survive at sea or find a new port. The fact that these essentials were left on board further weakened the mutiny theory. And just like with piracy, the missing crew and lifeboat added more questions than answers. Where did they go, and why would they leave a perfectly functioning ship behind? There was also no sign of damage to the Mary Celeste that might have indicated a chaotic attempt to seize control of the vessel. Everything remained in its place, from the cargo to the crew's personal effects. The ship's log provided no hint of trouble brewing among the crew or any signs of discord. The theory that the crew had simply decided to abandon ship as part of a mutinous plot didn't quite fit the evidence. As these two theories, piracy and mutiny, were thoroughly examined, they ultimately began to fall apart under closer scrutiny. The lack of violence, theft, or damage on board left investigators grasping for other explanations. Why would the crew abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship with no clear signs of danger or distress? Though both theories would continue to circulate in the years following the discovery of the Mary Celeste, neither was ever conclusively proven. Instead, As these conventional explanations lost traction, more outlandish and speculative theories began to emerge, drawing on natural disasters, freak accidents, and even supernatural elements to explain the eerie fate of the crew. The theories of piracy and mutiny, while logical at first glance, failed to account for the lack of evidence, and investigators were left to ponder what other possibilities might explain the ship's abandonment. Whatever happened on board, it seemed to be something that defied the ordinary expectations of a pirate attack or a violent mutiny. As we explore further into this mystery, we'll turn our attention to the next set of possibilities: natural disasters, accidents, or perhaps something far more mysterious. Could the crew of the Mary Celeste have been victims of a freak occurrence at sea? Or was there another, even stranger force at play? Natural disaster, the possibility of a seaquake or storm. With the more conventional theories of piracy and mutiny falling apart under scrutiny, investigators began to consider the possibility that the crew of the Mary Celeste had fallen victim to a natural disaster. The Atlantic Ocean is known for its unpredictable weather and occasional geological events, and some believe that the crew might have abandoned ship in response to a sudden and terrifying environmental event, such as a seaquake or a violent storm. One of the first natural explanations to be seriously considered was the possibility of a seaquake, an underwater earthquake that could have caused the Mary Celeste to shake violently and give the impression that the ship was about to sink. The Azores, the region where the Mary Celeste was last known to have sailed, is a volcanic archipelago, and the waters surrounding it are known for seismic activity. The theory goes that a sudden tremor from the ocean floor could have caused the ship to lurch unexpectedly, leading the crew to panic and abandon ship. A seaquake could explain why the crew left in such a hurry, especially if they feared that the ship's hull had been compromised or that a tidal wave might follow. Some speculated that the frayed rope found trailing behind the ship might have been an attempt to tow the lifeboat behind the Mary Celeste, perhaps indicating that the crew intended to stay close to the ship while waiting for the danger to pass. However, if the rope had snapped or the lifeboat had become lost, the crew would have been stranded in open waters. This theory has several attractive elements. A seaquake could occur without leaving visible signs of damage on the ship, which would explain why the Mary Celeste was found in good condition. Additionally, the sudden and unexpected nature of a quake might cause even an experienced captain like Benjamin Briggs to make the decision to temporarily abandon ship. A seaquake might also have led the crew to believe that the ship was taking on water or that an even larger wave was on the way, prompting them to flee in the lifeboat. However, there are a few major problems with this theory. For one, the Mary Celeste was found relatively dry, with no significant amount of water in the hold. If the crew had truly believed the ship was sinking, there likely would have been more evidence of flooding or structural damage. Moreover, seaquakes, while alarming, are not typically catastrophic events for well-built ships like the Mary Celeste. Experienced sailors, like Briggs and his crew, would have been trained to handle such a situation without abandoning ship so quickly. Another natural disaster theory revolved around the idea of a waterspout, a tornado-like phenomenon that forms over the ocean. Waterspouts are capable of generating extremely strong winds and waves, which could have damaged the ship's rigging and sails. Some suggested that a waterspout might have ripped through the Mary Celeste's path, terrifying the crew into thinking that the ship was in immediate danger. The sudden drop in atmospheric pressure caused by a waterspout could have also forced water to enter the ship's hull, making it appear as if the ship was sinking. While the waterspout theory might explain some of the damage to the sails and the frayed rope trailing behind the ship, it too has significant gaps. For one, There were no visible signs of significant damage to the ship's structure or hull that would be expected from such a powerful weather event. Additionally, waterspouts, while dangerous, are generally short-lived and localized, and an experienced captain like Briggs would likely have recognized the phenomenon and known how to navigate around it. Other weather-related theories included the possibility of a rogue wave, a rare and unusually large wave that can appear seemingly out of nowhere. Rogue waves have been known to capsize smaller vessels and cause serious damage to larger ships. Some theorize that a massive wave might have hit the Mary Celeste, flooding the deck and panicking the crew into thinking the ship was sinking. In their haste, they could have abandoned the ship and the lifeboat, only to be lost at sea. Again, while the rogue wave theory might explain why the crew abandoned the ship, it leaves many questions unanswered. The Mary Celeste showed no significant signs of being hit by a massive wave, there was no damage to the hull, and the interior of the ship remained largely dry. Additionally, rogue waves, while dangerous, are extremely rare, and it would have taken an extraordinary event to drive the crew off the ship so suddenly. As these theories were considered and debated, one key question continued to loom: if the crew had abandoned ship and the lifeboat, why had they not returned once the danger had passed? Captain Briggs was a careful and experienced mariner, unlikely to make rash decisions. If the crew had left the Mary Celeste in response to a temporary threat like a seaquake or a waterspout, they would have almost certainly returned once the immediate danger had passed. The fact that they were never seen again suggested that something else had gone terribly wrong after they left the ship. Moreover, the state of the Mary Celeste itself did not support the idea of a ship in distress. There were no obvious signs of panic or chaos on board, no indication that the crew had struggled to survive. The ship's condition remained remarkably intact, leading some to speculate that whatever had caused the crew to abandon ship might have been a combination of factors, perhaps a minor natural disaster, compounded by fear or miscommunication among the crew, resulting in a hasty decision to leave the vessel. Ultimately, while the idea of a natural disaster such as a seaquake, waterspout, or rogue wave remains one of the more plausible explanations, it is far from definitive. The lack of concrete evidence and the many gaps in these theories leave investigators and the public unsatisfied. The crew's disappearance continues to baffle those who have studied the case, as no single explanation seems to account for all the strange details of the Mary Celeste's abandonment. As these natural disaster theories were considered and debated, even stranger possibilities began to surface. Could the crew have been the victims of a supernatural force, or was something more unusual at play? As the mystery of the Mary Celeste deepened, the lack of answers only fueled more speculation, leading to an array of increasingly bizarre and far-fetched theories. Poisonous fumes, the alcohol cargo theory. One of the more intriguing and practical explanations for the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew involves the very cargo she was carrying, denatured alcohol. With over 1,700 barrels of this volatile substance on board, the ship's hold was filled with highly flammable and dangerous material. The theory proposes that these barrels, which were not sealed as tightly as modern shipping standards would require, could have leaked, allowing fumes to accumulate below deck. The result? A terrifying and potentially explosive situation that may have driven Captain Benjamin Briggs and his crew to make a fateful decision. Denatured alcohol is known for producing toxic and flammable vapors, especially if it's improperly stored or if the barrels are damaged. Some of the barrels were found to be empty when the Mary Celeste was discovered, leading investigators to consider the possibility that these barrels may have leaked during the voyage, filling the ship with dangerous fumes. If the crew detected the smell of these fumes, it would have raised immediate alarms about a possible explosion. Given the hazardous nature of the cargo, it's plausible that Captain Briggs, fearing for the safety of his family and crew, ordered everyone into the lifeboat to escape the potential blast. The theory also helps explain certain clues that were found on the abandoned ship. The frayed rope trailing behind the Mary Celeste could indicate that the crew intended to tow the lifeboat behind the ship and return once the fumes had dissipated and it was safe to reboard. This suggests that the abandonment was meant to be temporary. The lack of damage to the ship, combined with the fact that all the provisions and personal belongings were left behind, supports the idea that the crew did not intend to leave the Mary Celeste for good. But what went wrong? If the crew had safely left the ship in the lifeboat, why didn't they return once the danger had passed? One theory suggests that the rope towing the lifeboat may have snapped, leaving the crew stranded at sea while the Mary Celeste drifted away. The lifeboat could have been overwhelmed by waves or adverse weather conditions, making it impossible for the crew to navigate their way back to the ship. Another possibility is that the fumes from the alcohol were stronger than anticipated, causing confusion and disorientation among the crew. Denatured alcohol fumes, when inhaled in large quantities, can lead to dizziness, headaches, and impaired judgment. It's possible that in their panic, the crew made a series of poor decisions, including leaving the ship and possibly becoming lost at sea. However, there are still questions that remain unanswered. For example, why didn't the investigators find more evidence of alcohol vapors when the ship was boarded by the crew of the Dei Grazia? The ship was still intact, with no signs of an explosion or fire. Furthermore, although 9 barrels of alcohol were empty, the remaining cargo was undisturbed, suggesting that the situation hadn't reached the point of critical danger. Despite these uncertainties, the alcohol cargo theory remains one of the more plausible explanations for why the crew of the Mary Celeste might have abandoned a perfectly seaworthy ship. It accounts for the missing lifeboat, the calm state of the ship, and the lack of signs of a struggle. But it also leaves haunting questions. What happened to the crew after they left the ship? And why was there no sign of them or the lifeboat ever found? While this theory has been explored by historians and investigators for decades, like so many others in the case of the Mary Celeste, it stopped short of providing a complete and definitive answer. The missing crew, lost somewhere in the vast Atlantic, remains the most significant piece of the puzzle that continues to elude explanation. Supernatural theories, the ghost ship legend grows. As time passed and the mystery of the Mary Celeste remained unsolved, the lack of clear answers began to invite more fantastical and supernatural explanations. The very idea of a fully intact ship found drifting in the open ocean with no crew and no sign of a struggle sparked the imagination of the public, and soon, the Mary Celeste became not just a maritime mystery but a legend, an infamous ghost ship. One of the earliest supernatural theories involved the notion of sea monsters. In the late 19th century, belief in such creatures was not uncommon, and tales of giant squid or other enormous, unknown sea animals attacking ships were part of maritime folklore. Some speculated that a monstrous creature had risen from the depths of the Atlantic, snatching the crew from the deck and dragging them into the ocean, leaving the ship eerily abandoned. While such stories made for thrilling headlines and fireside tales, they lacked any evidence, and the idea of sea monsters soon faded into the realm of pure fantasy. Another supernatural explanation pointed to the existence of the Bermuda Triangle, even though the Mary Celeste was found far from this infamous area. The Bermuda Triangle has long been associated with mysterious disappearances, and though the Mary Celeste never sailed through its waters, some speculated that an unseen force similar to those believed to operate in the triangle might have caused the crew to vanish. In later years, this idea merged with broader supernatural beliefs about the dangers lurking in the ocean, powers that could make entire crews disappear without a trace. Another popular theory during the time was that the crew had fallen victim to a paranormal event, such as a ghostly apparition or mass hysteria. Some suggested that a spirit or malevolent entity could have driven the crew mad, leading them to abandon ship in a panic. This theory, though completely lacking in evidence, was bolstered by the eerie nature of the ship's discovery, a vessel found drifting without damage, with all personal effects left undisturbed. To many, it seemed almost as though the ship had been abandoned in the middle of a normal day, making the idea of supernatural forces all the more tempting. Adding to the intrigue was the Mary Celeste curse, a notion that began to spread as the ship's troubled history came to light. Before being renamed the Mary Celeste, the ship had been known as the Amazon, and during its earlier voyages, it had suffered several mishaps, including a collision and a fire. Some began to believe that the ship was cursed, and that whatever had befallen the Mary Celeste's crew was part of a larger, sinister force that had haunted the ship throughout its history. While these supernatural theories certainly captured the imagination, they were ultimately seen as little more than speculative fantasy. The late 19th century was a time when spiritualism and ghost stories were popular, and the unexplained mystery of the Mary Celeste was the perfect canvas for such tales. Writers and newspapers were quick to sensationalize the story, turning it from a maritime mystery into a legend of the unknown. The idea of a ghost ship, crewed by spirits or haunted by unseen forces, only added to the public's fascination with the case. These theories might have been dismissed by serious investigators, but they became a part of the folklore surrounding the Mary Celeste. In the decades following its discovery, stories of ghost ships, haunted seas, and unexplained disappearances grew, with the Mary Celeste often cited as one of the most famous examples of such phenomena. As time passed, the true details of the case were often overshadowed by the legend itself, with fiction and fact becoming increasingly difficult to separate. Those supernatural explanations are among the most far-fetched. They highlight the impact that the mystery of the Mary Celeste had on public consciousness. As rational explanations like piracy, mutiny, or natural disasters failed to fully account for the ship's abandonment, the public turned to more imaginative possibilities. The notion that the Mary Celeste was more than just a ship, that it was a symbol of the unexplained, drifting endlessly across the ocean, gave the story an almost mythical status. Ultimately, the supernatural theories surrounding the Mary Celeste are part of what makes this mystery so enduring. Even though we now have more logical and scientific explanations for the crew's disappearance, the story's legacy as a ghost ship continues to captivate those with a taste for the unknown. The mystery of the Mary Celeste, and the legends that have grown around it, remind us that sometimes the unknown is more compelling than the truth. The court trials, fraud, suspicion, and controversy. Following the discovery of the Mary Celeste, the legal and financial aspects of the case quickly became entangled in a web of suspicion and controversy. While the mystery of the missing crew captivated the public's imagination, the authorities in Gibraltar were more concerned with the potential for fraud and the possibility that the ship's abandonment was part of a deliberate scheme. The salvage hearing, led by Frederick Solly Flood, was meant to determine the fate of the ship and the reward for the crew of the Dei Grazia, who had discovered the Mary Celeste adrift. At the heart of the controversy was Flood himself. Known for his skeptical and suspicious nature, Flood was convinced from the outset that there was something more sinister at play. He believed that the crew of the Mary Celeste, or even Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Grazia, might have been involved in a fraudulent scheme to collect insurance money or a salvage reward. The theory was that the ship had been deliberately abandoned, and the disappearance of the crew was part of a staged plan. Flood's suspicions were initially fueled by the seemingly unusual circumstances surrounding the ship's discovery. The Mary Celeste was found in good condition, with no signs of serious damage or foul play. Yet, the crew had vanished without a trace, leaving behind their personal belongings, provisions, and navigational equipment. To Flood, this suggested that the ship might have been abandoned for financial gain, perhaps with the intention of later returning to claim it. Flood also focused his attention on the Dei Grazia's crew, questioning why they had stumbled upon the Mary Celeste so conveniently. The fact that Captain Morehouse knew Captain Benjamin Briggs personally only heightened Flood's suspicions. Some speculated that the two captains might have colluded to stage the abandonment, allowing Morehouse to claim a substantial salvage reward while Briggs and his crew disappeared with the rest of the ship's cargo. The salvage hearing in Gibraltar became a drawn-out legal process, with Flood scrutinizing every detail of the Mary Celeste's final voyage. He ordered a thorough examination of the ship, looking for any clues that might indicate fraud or foul play. However, despite his efforts, no concrete evidence was ever found to support the idea of a conspiracy. The ship was in good condition, the cargo was mostly intact, and there were no signs of violence or intentional damage. Flood's theory of fraud was further undermined by the fact that there was no significant financial incentive for Captain Briggs to abandon the ship. The cargo of denatured alcohol, while valuable, was not particularly lucrative, and there was no evidence that the Mary Celeste was overinsured. Additionally, Briggs had a reputation as a devout Christian and a trustworthy mariner, making it highly unlikely that he would have been involved in such a scheme. Despite the lack of evidence, Flood remained convinced that something illegal had occurred. He pressed on with the investigation, casting suspicion on both the Mary Celeste's crew and the crew of the Dei Grazia. However, his inability to produce any proof of wrongdoing led to growing frustration among the authorities in Gibraltar. After weeks of questioning and investigation, the case was finally closed without any charges being filed. In the end, the court awarded a salvage payment to Captain Morehouse and his crew, but the amount was far less than they had hoped for. Due to the lingering suspicions surrounding the case, the court reduced the reward, effectively punishing the Dei Grazia's crew for their involvement in a mystery that no one could fully explain. The salvage award amounted to less than 1/5 of the value of the ship and its cargo, leaving Morehouse and his crew feeling shortchanged. The legal proceedings surrounding the Mary Celeste only deepened the mystery. The lack of a clear explanation for the crew's disappearance, combined with Flood's relentless pursuit of fraud charges, left many questions unanswered. Was the ship truly abandoned out of fear or panic, or was there a more sinister motive behind the crew's vanishing? The court trials also cast a shadow over the legacy of the Mary Celeste. What could have been a straightforward salvage operation turned into a legal quagmire, filled with suspicion and accusation. The idea that the crew of the Dei Grazia, or even Captain Briggs himself, might have been involved in a fraudulent scheme lingered long after the case was closed, further muddying the waters of an already baffling mystery. While the court trials failed to provide definitive answers, they did serve to highlight the unusual and controversial nature of the Mary Celeste's abandonment. The ship's reputation as a ghost ship was only bolstered by the legal drama that followed, and the mystery of what truly happened aboard the Mary Celeste continued to capture the public's imagination. The trial ended with more questions than answers, and despite the best efforts of investigators, the fate of the crew remained a puzzle. With no clear resolution in sight, the legend of the Mary Celeste grew, with each new theory adding to its mystique. As the years passed, the case became more than just a legal matter. It became a story for the ages, an unsolved mystery that would forever haunt the annals of maritime history. The legacy of the Mary Celeste, a mystery that endures. The story of the Mary Celeste has captured the imagination of historians, writers, and the public for over a century, and even today, it remains one of the most enduring maritime mysteries of all time. Despite numerous investigations, endless theories, and countless speculations, the question of what happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste has never been definitively answered. The ship itself has become a symbol of the unknown, a ghostly reminder of the dangers and unpredictability of the sea. Following the legal trials and the salvage hearing in Gibraltar, the Mary Celeste was eventually returned to service. However, the ship's reputation as a ghost ship haunted it for the rest of its days. No matter where it sailed, the story of its abandoned voyage and missing crew followed, casting a shadow over its every journey. The ship changed hands several times over the following years, but it never shook the aura of mystery that surrounded it. In 1885, after more than a decade of sailing under different owners, the Mary Celeste met its final fate. It was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti in an insurance fraud scheme, a grim end for a vessel that had already become infamous. The wreck, though planned by its then owner, did little to tarnish the legend of the ship. Instead, the story of the Mary Celeste's eerie past only continued to grow. What makes the Mary Celeste mystery so enduring is not just the unanswered question of the crew's disappearance, but the wide variety of plausible and implausible explanations that have surfaced over the years. From the earliest theories of piracy and mutiny to the more far-fetched ideas involving sea monsters and supernatural forces, each new suggestion has added another layer to the ship's legacy. The Mary Celeste has also found its way into popular culture, inspiring countless books, films, and documentaries. The image of the ship, drifting alone in the vast Atlantic, with no sign of life on board, has become iconic. Writers like Arthur Conan Doyle used the story as inspiration for their own fictional tales, and as time passed, the line between fact and fiction began to blur. The true story of the Mary Celeste was embellished, distorted, and retold in new ways, ensuring its place in the annals of maritime lore. For historians and investigators, the case of the Mary Celeste remains a tantalizing puzzle. Each new piece of evidence or discovery only seems to raise more questions. Was the crew forced to abandon ship due to a natural disaster, or were they victims of some unseen threat? Did a freak accident or miscommunication lead to their demise, or is there something more sinister at play? The lack of any conclusive evidence has allowed the mystery to remain alive, with new theories still being proposed to this day. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Mary Celeste is how it continues to resonate with people. The ship, now long gone, has become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that some questions may never be answered. In an age where technology allows us to explore even the deepest parts of the ocean and solve mysteries that once seemed impossible, the Mary Celeste stands as a testament to the enduring power of the unexplained. In many ways, the legacy of the Mary Celeste is as much about the mystery as it is about the ship itself. The fact that we still don't know what happened to the crew only adds to the allure. It has become one of those rare stories that has transcended time, moving beyond its historical context to become a legend in its own right. For over a century, the Mary Celeste has been a source of fascination, not only for maritime enthusiasts but for anyone drawn to the mysteries of the world. As we reflect on its legacy, we are reminded that, despite our best efforts, some mysteries may never be fully solved. The Mary Celeste, with its ghostly presence and unanswered questions, continues to drift through the currents of history, carrying with it the weight of one of the sea's most enduring enigmas. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the Mary Celeste, not the ship itself, but the questions it leaves behind, questions that may never be answered, but will forever intrigue those who seek to understand the mysteries of the deep. And that brings us to the end of our journey into the mystery of the Mary Celeste. A tale that has fascinated generations, with more questions than answers and theories that still keep us wondering. Thank you so much for joining me in exploring one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating stories from history. I'd love to have you join this community, so make sure to hit the notification bell to stay updated whenever new content is posted. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste? I can't wait to hear your theories. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care and keep exploring the wonders of history.